Vale, bueno, parece que se ve. Bueno, la charla es sobre kernel exploitation.
Presentation is about kernel exploitation. I know that there are many people fond of kernel here. First of all, I would like to congratulate RootedCON on 10th anniversary. I'm not the only one who is flattering RootedCON. I think I have participated in all the RootedCON. Out of the 10 RootedCONs, I gave presentation in 4 of them. And one year I gave 2 presentations, and then another edition I shared a presentation with Danny. We won. We were the best rated presentation. And well, as I said, our presentations in the past were really entertaining, good fun, but they are not good fun anymore. Now they are really boring. Who am I? I'm Jaime Peñalba, Twitter Nighterman, and most of my time is devoted to being a hater at the interwebs. And now, seriously, you may know me better for being the king of small things. Well, usually you know me as well for being the king of small things, and this is the type of things that I do when I go to El Hormiguero TV show, and this is what I have to put up with. Let us see if you do us some magic tricks, but not with cards, but with drinks. And then Danito saying after plus magician plus drink, 15 euros, that not include bugs from Kernel. Well, this is now talking seriously. So I didn't have any recent photographs to bring with me. So this is me. I've been working as a researcher for Kernel, for COSE Inc. As I say, it was very cool. I used to have CTFs, but now I waste my time in GDB. Now this is the disclaimer that I show every year. If you go back to presentation that I gave 2 years ago, it was the very same disclaimer. Please do not use Docker for security purposes. Okay, because we don't have lots of time, I will skip that. What is this all about? I'm not a big fan of exploitation talks or of no specific bug, because that requires the audience to have a deep understanding of the targets. They are boring, hard to follow. If you get distracted, you may lose the whole thread of the presentation. So often these presentations are quite poor and people do not like them very much. This should be a trilogy. That is to say, talk about kernel. I don't talk about kernel. I don't speak about kernels because that's what I do on a daily basis. Talk about exploitation, memory management, developing tool sanitizer, how to find bugs. But because I will never do that, I'm going to try to make a mix. That is to say, I will try to explain a real-life bug and how to exploit it. What we will try to explain is, or to share with you, introduction to basic kernel concept, basic kernel exploitation, some mitigations that are often implemented in kernel. I will not be talking about memory management or dynamic memory management, and I will tell you or share with you a real-world exploit. And all that, I will try to explain it at a very high level. So I'm sure those of you with basic knowledge will not like it because you will not fully follow it, and those who have a high level of expertise, you go and say, please do not tell me all that shit, just tell me about the kernel. But let me tell about the bug. So I will start off with the Battle Royale at the RootedCON. Those who will survive will get free drinks. So basic things about kernel. Kernel, according to Wikipedia, I don't know whether you are aware of what kernel is about. I'm not going to read all that, but basically manages the memory, the processes. It is the separate area of the memory. Access is not allowed. You may interfere from different user space through system call and through many other methods. If you visit Wikipedia, okay, you may read through all that. This is a graph where we can see the slav allocator, the bug allocator. I cannot tell you more because we don't have the time for it, but these are a couple of basics. So virtual memory. Often, one of the first things that kernel makes is to manage the memory of the system, the physical memory. We have from byte 0 to 2 gigabytes of memory, or 8 or 20, you name it. But actually, the machine, when you are working with it, you don't see from byte 0 to the 8 gigabytes back. So you get to see these addresses and these ranges. Often, 32 bits, we had other problems. Those problems are not there anymore, and now with the 64 bits, because there isn't so much physical memory, not all the 64 bits are used for re-forwarding. So often in these cases, well, 47 bits and the SIM bit is used and then also extended. Those on top are negative, belong to the kernel, and those ones here at the bottom are from user space. And this chunk in the middle, because we haven't used these bits, so we don't forward it, we don't have access to it. So the most frequent thing is the 4-level page table using 47 bits for address space plus a bit sign. And then with that, you may direct 128 terabytes of memory, which is often normal for a process of user space, and 128 for kernel. In total, 256 terabytes. However, with shorter ago, 5-level page tables were introduced, and now you have addresses with 56 bits and 64 petabytes. Basic memory map looks like this. So you have the user space here. Based on the process that has been uploaded, we will upload a different memory map, allocations, linear allocations, and well, other things that are not relevant for this presentation. If we compare that to the previous graph, from here to top, including non-canonical addresses, that is to say that can be addressed up to here, we have the kernel, and whatever is below that, that is user space. The kernel space is being shared between all processes, and then depending on the memory map, this space changes. GDB, if you introduce a break, we have the syscall to open the file. You take a look at the process when you introduce the breakpoints, and then you take a look at the address limit, and this tells you that this address here, you may notice that it is the same as this one. This is one of the structures that the kernel uses when it's reading, checks that with that address limit. Am I leaving above or below? Am I reading above or below this user space? So what we often have is the kernel space, which is shared by all the processes, and then the processes change here at the bottom of this graph. Well, this is like a bit of a cheesy introduction, but there you go. So the basic exploit now. If this were a very far away galaxy, and we have a kernel release with no smart melt or any type of production, then someone would try to spoil everything. Let us suppose that we just create a mixed device, the kernel, and we map it here. In /vulnerable, we create a mixed device, and then IOCTL, so we don't have the function that implements that in the kernel. So when we launch an IOCTL to the mixed device, and then it's trying to preserve the memory by using GFP atomic, so number of introductions, and then you are very likely to return a null, an allocated null. If it goes to null, it returns null. So we go here to the pointer without checks. if we do not check whether it has returned null or not, actually this code will not return null, but it may return null. So if you don't check it, here in test we have 0, 0, 0, the pointer points out at 0, and when we go say to the point, do make the reference because I want to get access to this counter, and then we have 0, 0 plus 4. Well, that will depend on the padding of the structures. And then from the user space, the trigger is an open, and then we have the file desktop. This is quite simple. Then if it triggers null, a pointer clear reference should appear. And what happens if we map the 0 address? So we make an mmap and we map the 0 memory of the address, and what happens here? When the kernel will go and read the 0 address, then it will go to user space and I say, oh, the 0 address has been mapped, and then I will read what's in there. There you introduce this false structure. We will have the same format than the kernel, and then the counter you pointed to escalate privilege, which is this function here in the user space, and then it will do hacking things. And then you call the IOCTL, then you will have the bug, and then you will have a null pointer dereference. So we have the kernel, the structure. If this were to be null, when you call the counter, then it reads it from here, from the user space, which is set at 0, 0, 0, and then it says that it points to the code that we have in the user space, and then it executes it. It escalates privileges, and that's it. So congratulations for having traveled to 1999, and now you are OSEE certified. Now, mitigations. All this started to become a bit absurd because mitigations became trendy. If there are mitigations, there are no longer exploits, but for some reason this is not the case. For you to have a feel about the level of absurdity that we have reached, we have the null pointer of reference. This has been patched for many, many years now. So we have sanitizers here. We have everything that had been implemented for the side channel, for the control flow integrity, for SMAP, SMER. So 4 pages of mitigation. And this is a comic strip. Mitigator raising the bar on exploitation until no more exploits can be seen. So I will comment on a couple of most common mitigations, SMAP and SMAP. Everything that I will be showing to you will be Intel 864. SMAP and SMAP are hardware protections, like the ones that were used to mark a memory zone. They are non-executable, and this is reviewed by the processor. Your kernel doesn't do that. SMAP, if you are on a privileged mode or executing kernel code, pages that have been marked as user pages will not be read. And you cannot execute code from any pages that are user space, while the CPU is running in the privileged mode. So one it's implemented in bit 20, the other one in bit 21, and then in SMAP, CLC and stack flags are being used to clean and set it. So what will happen if we use our bug from 1999 with this? So we have a null, then the reference, and then this points at 0, then gets the structure. We try to read it, and I said that the code is in the user space. They will try to execute it, and then this message says, look, I cannot execute code that has been hosted in the user space. So, and then if we had this, what goes to read the 0 address, you cannot even read it in the user space, neither the 0 address or any other address. Another one that you may have heard of is KPTI or KSA. This one was implemented as a result of the Spectre meltdown attacks. So basically, it has 2 sets of page tables, has a set of page tables for kernels where all the user space are marked as non-executable, so you have 2 by 1, and then mitigation against side channels, and now you have a free SMAP that you get with your software. And then this another page table where the kernel is reduced to a minimum. Just enough space for syscalls and others. So therefore, you are reducing the level of exposure in terms of the size of memory that is being used to introduce attacks. This is like really awful, but there is nothing we can do about it. So if we take a look at it in a graphical manner, in the past, we had these page tables, no matter whether we were in user space with privileged mode or not, whereas now, with page tables isolation, when we are running on kernel mode, we have the user space, but the user space is marked as executable, and if it's running under in user space, we have a minimum area of attack. Therefore, what will happen if we don't have a SMAP or a SMED, and we could map zero address? So when we try to execute code in user space, would not allow us to do it, because you are in a privileged mode and you try to execute code here, it will destroy the page table that has marked the user space as non-executable. Management of dynamic memory. I will not be telling you lots about it. So it is very similar to keymalloc. It is the default method that is used to preserve memory, which is smaller than the page size in the kernel, which is often 4K. This is organized and stored in caches. This is done to avoid fragmentation, to improve performance. And in the past, this was done with coloring and others, so to try and improve the hits. If you get bored with this, Pepe can tell you more about it. So this is an example of all these that are created by default. They are multiples of 2, so cache is created for objects of A16, 32, 64, up until 8192, because they are the system, because they allocate so much, they have their own caches to store objects. NFCs, they have their own caches to store their objects. This is a basic graph. You have a cache made up of slabs, and each slab comes in with objects. Often slabs are the size of a page. They are not always multiple of pages. Often a page is the size of them. And then in this case, the example here, imagine cache 192 bytes. Not all the objects are here, but if the allocator that we're using is a slab and often contains 20 chunks, and if you are using a slab, you can enter 21 because the descriptors are put in the front. So allocators, ever since Linux was being implemented, several allocators have been implemented. The first one that was implemented was SLAP, comes from Solaris, then was followed by SLOP. In theory, smaller memory footprint and less locking, and SLOP, I don't often work with it, but it is often locking to aimed at embedded system. Each allocator has its own way to track the memory that has been allocated, the memory that has been free, the local CPU caches, etc. And now we have another graph. So we have the cache, and in the case of a slab, it keeps 3 lists. So this is a bit confusing because a slab is the name given to allocator as well as to the units, okay, to the actual slabs. Even if it just uses the allocator slab, the slab is the name that is given to the unit that contains 2 objects. In the case of a slab, it contains 3 lists: full, partial, and free. In the case of a slab, I would say that it only keeps the partial slab. And then this is the GDB with the scripts. And then if you take a look at the cache, for instance, the TCP, it tells you the space taken up by each of the objects, how many objects you can introduce in each of the slabs, how many pages start off with a slab, but information which is not relevant to you right now. And then there is another example here in the case of a slab. And as I said, this is the one that we don't use as much because slab is used more than this one. We have the objects.
This is the complete page, and within it we have the objects and slab descriptors. So here we have from other scripts in graphic mode, and with a simple cast there's two objects. One is located and the other is free, and here we have both of them are. So there's not a lot of time. We could do a lot with this. I'm not going to give the locator either, but we came here to see a real exploitation example. I don't know if you follow Twitter, you'll see tweets like this one. The fluoroacetate does it again. They used type confusion in Edge, race condition in the kernel, then an out-of-bound write in VMware to go from a browser to the host OS. They earn 130K plus per 13 master of PWM points. These are the monsters, and they really had a field day there. So if ever you ask or wonder how this works, we will try to explain it, but there's I don't have enough time for giving too many examples. I will show you our bug for obvious reasons. This is based on a risk condition. I'll show you the codes. It's not the real bug, but it's also useful as a framework. Our basic exploit will use a race condition that causes a corruption in one of these point linking. So the outline of what we do is we get the race condition to corrupt online and add twice the same item. Then we release the item that deletes an entry, an object. So it generates race after 3, then repeats the steps 1 to 4 to make a use after 3. So you get a UAF. So you do this with a race condition. I can't think of another way to exploit it. Anyway, so this is very basic, and I'll spend some time on it. So we can all, so we're all on the same page. So with this macro we define, this is the wonderful land of macros and kernels. So then this one macro points to another. So here we have the macro. So I'll create a new div from list, and the macro, whichever name, creates a structure, and it calls another macro with the same name. And this macro initializes the structure the list head with, sends the next and the previous, points it to itself. So it's the assembly is easier than the code. So here we have the use of the W-linked list. The first structure I found used list head. It's one of the backlight of lighting, so it has several drivers. So the kernel generates a list with a structure with whichever driver, and it links between them with an entry. So you link one to the next one. Here we can see it in graphic form. Here we have the list head to start, which is just a structure I showed you at the beginning with an X and priv, and then the objects that you are actually linking. Each one points to the next one and to the previous one. So these next and previous never point to the initial part of a structure, rather to the center or wherever you have to find the list head. If it is in the first field of a structure, it'll go there, or in the middle, it'll go there as well. So a white list points to itself. Here's a double list. So if we add an element to a list of linkers, we have the goal, the code, you indicate the list head and the item you want to add. So then it takes the header and the next of the header, puts the item right in the middle. You put it in the center. So with the previous example, as it pointed to itself, it just adds here the item. At least there's someone who's in his right mind here, because I hadn't realized that either. And that next time we want a flat table, okay? A podium. So we add the item, a new object, a new structure. If we add a second item, one ends up here, and it adds a new one between the list head and the one that was there earlier, that was the next. So then, to eliminate an item, it takes, you indicate the item to eliminate, it joins them, and the one in the middle, it removes it. So it gives it a poison with any data. So in case if it is used, the kernel will reject it. So you eliminate the item. What can we do with this bug? It's a race condition. We could call it add vulnerable subsystem. And here it verifies a structure that is an argument. If the structure from the edit is not false, it's not set to 0, then it sets it to 1. And you use a spin log to add it to the list and then unblock the list. Apparently it does this properly in order to avoid corrupting the list, so that two cores don't attempt to manage the same list at the same time. So here, if I run this code, two processes and two cores at the same time, both will reach at the same time with the same entry. So they'll say, hey, I'm 0. Well, I'm 0 too. So both will come in here. So when they come in here, they will set it to 1, and the same item will be added twice. Therefore, that's a problem. So let's see what happens if we add the same element to the list. We add it once, we add it a second time, and what changes is the arrows. It turns out that the next is pointing to ourselves, and the prev is also doing the same. So this is the list has continued to point the next, and the other one still goes back, but our item is pointing to ourselves. So after a double add, we release the list, because if we have the vulnerable system here, it also had a bug with that could enter twice to create a problem too. So you added this, yes, then you remove it from the lists and then release memory. So if we remove it from the list after this corruption, next will point to itself and the prev to another direction. So in addition, if you notice the previous code, you have not only undid the list, but you also have an object. So relax, because we're not doing anything with this. Anyway, this object here was released, so we have a list pointing to an object that is released. And if another process comes from the kernel using the same cache, it will locate on top of it. And if someone goes through this list, Well, what we do then to avoid this, to locate or reserve memory on this chunk that is free and enter data that we can control with any other syscall to keep kernel memory. Then you look for a code, a kernel code that can execute code that can use those data. Because you had a structure with pointers to functions, so I tried to change the pointers and then find a code that uses a structure, and you call a pointer. In this case, unfortunately, there was nothing to exploit. Otherwise, the bug would have been terminated. But in this case, all we had was a web queue, so you can exploit the memory now and then. When an event is run, it will take the work queue and it'll execute everything you order it to. But for this to be initiated, the user had to interact with the kernel. And so here I'm using the kernel, so the kernel, if the user wants to do something, it'll be worth nothing. So this was not apropos of anything, but I had to put it somewhere. So when you're exploiting dynamic memory bugs, you need one of these mechanisms to fulfill the following criteria. You have to be able to allocate and deallocate memory at will in the kernel. It's not enough to call a syscall. It has to be return to user space, keep the memory there, and for reuse and release. Then I want to control the allocation size to be able to hit different caches. So in this way I can control which cache it will end up, so I'm sure that the object to be rewritten was in that same cache or cache. You will find that spraying is required, so having high limits is desired for the syscalls. If you don't add at the beginning or the end of the buffer, I usually do this in two ways. One is using message queues. Google has many tutorials. You put messages in the queue. In this way, you reserve memory, and depending on the size of the message, it will go to one cache or another. So when you use them up, when one consumes messages, you release memory in the kernel. We can control the size. The thing is that this adds 48 bytes, which is the normal amount of the architecture. You only control 8 of those 48, and it allows you to add any type of data. And the limits are quite high. I don't remember how many message queues, but it's quite a high number. Then there's another method which I've never seen anyone use it. I've commented this on Twitter, and I said, look, this is what I use, but I've never seen anyone use it, because this is one of the first subsystems where I started looking bugs in key management. People who don't look at the kernel, and we can introduce case and delete them in the kernel. So with this, we can allocate memory using the number of the name of the key or the data of the key. I'd rather use the name instead of the number. So by using the name, we don't get any data initially. In this way, we control all bytes except the last, which is a null. So then the keys cannot be exactly the same. They have to vary at least in 1 byte, because they could collide. And this one is limited in regards to permissions. There's the key quota, which is usually limited to 200 Ks. So things get a bit dodgy after this. He says, "Trust me, I am science," the dog says. So let's try to abuse the use after free. There was no way to exploit it, obviously. So you're going to have to believe me, because I'm not going to show you the code or anything. You will have to take my word for it. So we will try. Let's see what we have if we had another entry into the doubly linked list. If we add a second object to the list, when you put it in the middle, gets the prev to point to the previous. So what we have here is a 8-byte writing that point to an address that we haven't got. So this is getting worse and worse, isn't it? So there's fewer things that you can control. So if you take a look at this, you override here the offset 176, and the only thing we know is that we'll point to the previous object in the list, to object 168. Now that we know that we can overwrite 8 bytes of data that we're not controlling, the offset 176 of a object that we can allocate another system there, we have to look for the following. I thought different ways to try to exploit this. We would have to look for the following. A structure that fits in the 192-byte cache that has a pointer to another structure within the 176 that can be overwritten, and the ability to reserve memory as we require. This is not an easy task because we get objects with between 128 to 192 bytes. So this is the structure. So I thought of different ideas to exploit this. One was obviously looking for structure between these two sizes, 184 and 92. In position 176 had a pointer. That would be great. And it should be part of the kernel core. A crazy idea would prove to be worthless, which was allocate a 176 byte string and override the null terminator with our primitive. And then try to exercise the kernel and examine the 192 byte cache with all the objects that fell into it. This obviously needed plenty more work than the other steps. So I kept the first option. Here I load in the structures and the script that can search all the objects in cache 192 with a pointer to function in byte 176. So all of these structures would fall within that pattern. So when you check them out, you see that some are file operations, like port series, parallel port, variables and static lines that can allocate and deallocate. The EF, I suppose it's the UFI. The E1000 must be the... It's not worth with the machine that uses this. In the offset 176 here, we do have a pointer to function. But if I am unable to locate the structure in that empty space in the use after free, it's worthless, so I don't have any control over it. So I ended up the long way, which is to run the kernel command as much as possible, and then check all the allocations in the 192 cache. When the kernel doesn't save who allocated what, So you can do it with a sanitizer. So you review all the allocations, you get the backtrace, who allocated the objects, you get a checksum of stack 3, you eliminate all of them that are repeated, and you get a list. This is the list I could fit into the screen, because it's one stack, and the list is maybe 400 of these stacks. So you have no option but to use the text editor and start to examine the code and see what did it allocate and if you could use that to exploit it. So 3 days later, this is true. After a lot of desperation, I found that one of our subsystems was shared memory segment. So this fulfilled the criteria within the 192-byte cache with a point to something at offset 76. We can allocate and deallocate as well. So this means that the structure can be located in the 192 cache. So if we look at the structure that is created here in shared memory, it's in blue there, but if there's 120 bytes and we wanted to write in 176, so the structure is considerably smaller. But this is the kernel call, and we have a new shared memory segment, so it creates the structure I showed you before, the pointer to that structure. So here I have the size of the structure, which was 120, I think, and this calls IPC-alloc with the size plus the IPRC size. So you add the IPCRU structure in front. So it's it leads up to 184. Plus the offset is 276, which is what we wanted to overwrite. And the offset at 112 is this one here, this pointer that points to a user structure. So the relationship between both structures is this, the one we use for shared memory. This is the one we will overwrite. The pointer will overwrite, and this points to the structure that has been utilized. Another important thing of this is that when you start looking for bugs, you keep finding bugs in different places and with different functions. So you have to look for an entire file system. This is a structure for using the locking in the memory. So with the bug that now we have a use after free, we allocate here in a shared memory segments. This object was free and we had the list pointing to this object. So we reserve a shared memory chunk, and if we're lucky, it'll fall right on top. Before it was a vulnerable subsystem, now we have a structure of shared memory in the kernel. Initially there was 64 kilobytes of the structure, and then what we add into it, which is 120, which is here. And in the 176 offset, we have the kernel. So if when we have exploited the first use after free, and this list should not have a shared memory segment, it would be a type confusing. So if we add a new item of the vulnerable system to the list, we add it here, and we overwrite this pointer. So now what we have is a shared memory segment with a pointer that points here, and let's see what we can do with it. What we do is we abuse again the UAF with a raise condition to add this item twice, and so that when we delete it, it'll release and we'll have a use after free. And now we can exploit a second use after free and allocate what we please. So we'll have the full control of the structure point in here. And here we can locate or allocate a structure. What was its name? User struct. We will put it here and have total control over this. So, if now we use a technique between using message queues or allocating keys, we use the message queue, we put a message in the queue, and then we are lucky enough to allocate right above the use after free. So, in the past we should have two structures of a vulnerable subsystem that we're exploiting. We have a structure in shared memory that points to the previous object, so then leads to a new use after free, and there's a structure that we can control entirely because we're using a message queue and all the data. But now you see this is not the end of the problems. One of them is that when we take a look at the well, it turns out that we're pointing to log set 168, and if the user struct occupies 104 bytes, 104 plus 168 gives 272. So the gap is just 92. So then we are exceeding the amount of bytes. So we are writing maybe this part of the structure, and we go to read the rest. We're reading beyond that 192 byte chunk. So we have a small problem. Here you can see it graphically. The pointer pointing the 168. Here we get basically the same. We have a structure with 24 byte free. And as from here we're reading outside towards the next object. So this looks like we're going backward instead of forward. So don't worry, there are more problems. It could seem simple to reserve on memory chunks that have just been released, but it's not the case. The case is it's not deterministic. You have a kernel with many CPUs, chunks. So you have guys with a browser, each one is doing their own thing, and you're competing with the rest of people who are just adding noise. Someone make him appear, reserve this 192 chunk, and everything will end up poorly. Then there are complex things like to avoid locking when releasing and blocking memory. Cache through CPU is used so that each CPU can allocate memory quickly without using spin locks, etc. Therefore, it is necessary to try to gain some space. So this depends on many things, like system memory, the pressure it has, what's the burden. So your job is to transform something that is non-deterministic and unstable by nature into something that is relatively stable. So we'll continue with what we were doing earlier, where we said we had 24 bytes left because of the chunk. The following, when we try to read here, we're reading from another memory chunk. So we would have a sort of an overflow. Here we have the original structure with the first 24 bytes, and these are not going to be in the next chunk. So what we will do is turn the structure around, This is the beginning of the structure. We put it here at the end, and this was at the end. We put it here to the beginning. We have a padding of unnecessary data because the structure was about 120 bytes. We introduce a padding and we change the structure. So we will take a look. It will be a slab in the 192 cache, and this is an example. You're using slabs instead of flunks, so you use chunks. One chunk is 192 bytes.
And what we want to do here is that the next chunk of data, when you read outside, you just want to control the next chunk of data as well. So the first thing that we do is to get these slabs from cache 192 cache, and then you see, let us see what the slabs are doing, and then those that are half full, we fill them. So depending on the kernel slab, you go to proc slab info to see how many caches have been located, and then you read that. We read that file and we fill in those free spaces. To do that, we may use the messenger, the code, the queues of the messages. So we scan any random data of a specific size so that it fits in within that cache, and then we fill all the free spaces. And the next thing that we want to do is to create 2 new slabs so that we control those 2 new slabs with our data. And then in those data, we will be entering this structure. So after filling them, well, in this case, we call kmalloc because we want to create to control the start of the object. So here this enters a structure from the start, and then we control since byte 0 the actual structure, and we create 40 keys. And then we enter in the name, the data of this structure. So we spam there, and then we have created 2 new slabs that we fully control ourselves. Then we create 3 keys, not random, but 3 sequential keys, so that we create 3 holes. So if we are unlucky and someone goes over and use free space, we can allocate ourselves in these holes that we have provided. So we trigger the risk condition again, then we enter the system of the vulnerable, the structure of the vulnerable system, and then after producing the use after free by using mcgen, we point the counter to our structure. So we cannot really explain it that well, but that's the reason why the slides have so much verbosity in them. So as long as you are clear about this craziness, a bit clear about this craziness, I will be happy. So what will be the final aspect of these memory chunks? So we have the MSG gen, and then the next one. Here we will also have all the data controlled by ourselves. After reading it, it will move on to read this other chunk. So if you get them both and you move them, the structure is placed in the appropriate position. So we have a segment which is in a list and shouldn't be there. We have a pointer at that structure, and you fully control it. How do you exploit it? This is the structure where we have full control. If you take a look at it, well, probably you may find something that we've been discussing this afternoon. Again, we have another double linked list that is used for hash tables. When it is about to be deleted, it says prep. If in my fake structure in the prep I put what it says next, and here I put the memory address that I want to overwrite, and then in the next the data that I want. To trigger that piece of code, a number of conditions are to be met. So you need to lock the shared memory segment. Once you lock it, when you release the shared segment, the counter field should be set to 1. So for those reference counters, must be set to 1. So that when it is set to 0, says, well, no one is using this object in the memory, therefore I will free it. When you free it, this code is executed. And then we achieve it. So after all this, we have all this. And then we may write 8 bytes of data anywhere in the memory. So what is the most common thing to do? Often people describe a file operation structure. For mice operation, you create a mixed device or anything, because this is the most basic structure of unit, where you have a list of pointers. When you do a seek, a read, a grade, when you open a serial port is not the same as opening the file with your passwords. So when you call seek, you are calling different functions in the kernel. Often these are global, they have been defined in the kernel, and they are quite easy to find. So therefore they are widely used. In this case, we will be using the dep-ptmx, and we will be overriding the pointer lseek. The pointer lseek points at a dummy implementation. Doesn't know what it doesn't let the null, probably because it doesn't do the check before. So this implementation, no one uses it. We overwrite it, and then I tell you more about it. If we take a look at the prototype of this function, no lseek, the file descriptor will be the first argument, the second argument offset, and the third argument origin of the offset. If you know the calling convention, which is often used in Intel, this will come in the CPU register, and this will come in RDX. So when you will call lseek from user space, we can control the registers, the RSI and RSEP. So because we can control these two, well, the last one will not be good because it is in Intel 32 bytes. The offset is good for us because it's 64. So we move RSI from RSP or exchange them will be enough, and doing a stack pivot is very simple, very easy thing to do. I'm not going to explain you this, but basically there are thousands of ways. So you disable SMAP and SMAP to bypass it, or try to find your user space page in the kernel memory and to mark it as executable. This is what I will be doing here. So we assume that we have overridden the pointer of lseek function when you open dp-tmx. Then you call seek, and then the argument, you enter the address where we have our fake stack. Then the fake stack will chain, and then the rob chain will be changed. The site will mark it as executable, and then our code will be triggered. This is the direct mapping. Well, that depends on the different versions of the kernel. Sometimes you can extract the address from here. Sometimes you cannot do it and mark it as executable. So in the exploit, if we forget about everything that we have done or omit everything that we have done, if the file operations pointer, we open the dp-tmx, you call the seek function where we have written the pointer in kernel, and when you get to the seek function, you will do a stack pivot to this memory address, which is a non-canonical address. You give it a valid address, and then it will do a stack pivot. Then we will have a drop chain, and then our page will be marked as executable. Then there will be this function. It will look for it in the kernel. It will mark it as executable, and then we will be executing BBAS or we shall. Last, we will have to do a bit of a cleanup, because after all this mess, the kernel is not very stable. Then you will have to clean the common caches that you may have corrupted, any pointers that you may have overridden, like the file operations that we wrote in the end. Then the stack, you leave it as it is. Before you may clean the stack to go back rightly or in good condition to the user space. So to fix, to clean up everything that you may have broken. I have a demo here, and I hope that it is not as confusing as the words of this lady. This is a virtual machine. Okay, we load the image. I have the exploit. So this is not the most stable one, but if this is not stable, it is not good at all. But sometimes I just do the POC and deliver it, and that's it. I don't complicate my life. But this must be stable for it to be useful, of course. Oh, has worked. Okay, we can read file and this kind of thing. So this is crap. I don't often give presentations about this because I say, well, this must be really boring, may fall you may fall asleep if I sit down to this type of presentation and say, look, I'm not interested in this. Well, but anyway, this year I decided to share that with you, and now you can criticize me as much as you'd like to. And this is all from me. Sometimes I see this type of craps and I say, well, this is like a Wanga has written this. It's been a pleasure to be here in this 10th edition of the RootedCON. So we are that old now. Well, I still keep my hair. All right, are there questions? Who dares? Who dares? Who is brave enough to ask questions? I'm very daring myself. Well, many have survived to this presentation. They may not have any questions. So remember to use the mic for the presentation. There are 7 or 8 or 9 people queuing to ask a question. No, I might have a question. Let's see, how can I structure the question? I still didn't get the 0%. Yes, it is so. It's just impossible to follow. This is a presentation to be published in a blog post. But if people are clearer now as to how to exploit a real bug, well, I would be happy. Even if you create a fuzzer to find a point to introduce a bug, can you automate it? Can somehow? No, I don't know what part you can automate. You may automate the fuzzer. Of course, I don't do all that by hand or manually. I need to find the structures that have this size, and then I apply it. I will save who have built-in objects. Okay, let us do sanitizer or tracer in a kernel. This is as much as you can automate. I don't think you cannot do any scanner here. If that would be it, I would lose my job. Well, and what about machine learning? Well, I leave that up to PhD people. I'm a plumber, okay? I'm not an academic. Could you do something to try and find the structures that would fit squarely, or perhaps looking them in the kernel from distance? Or, well, yes, I have scribers that I go and tell them, tell me all the structures of this size, and not only that, and in this onset, point to this function or point to this structure, or it is a Boolean. But at the end of the day, it is the person that needs a different object each time. When you explode in all the trainings, they say, look, this is the start overflow, override the network, and then haha, so good fun. If it is not real, it doesn't work. So people have the tips. Oh, I read the Mayokerum and this is a tip. And I say, look, I don't care the allocator that is being used. So the book will go to a different place every time. So what you have to do is to use your brains and something that cannot be exploded. Actually, this bug was taken over by those of Google. They set a low level of risk, but it continues to be there. So they thought that it was low risk because it could not be exploited. But I cannot think about anything that you can automate, because all cases to me are different from each other. Then from books you learn 3 techniques, but then in real life you can only, well, you either don't apply any of those techniques or you apply the 3 of them simultaneously. All right, so break time now. Okay, so I haven't finished. Okay, be back on time. I would like my friends from the JAC to have as much time as needed for their presentation. Thank you very much.